A broke old man limped into my shop today, with an object that was hidden within his hand. He approached the counter humbly and asked, "Excuse me, is your store still open, young man?" And that was all that he needed to say, having said so much more with his bloodshot eyes. His body spoke with the wrinkles that split his skin, and the limp told me the story of his entire life. "I was in the war," his limp said to me. "A grenade found me in our beachhead advance. A heart-shaped medal is what they handed me, and it's all I have left to remember France." But then it recalled what the medic had sewn in, under the sandy wound that was tangled by gauze. Come to think of it, that's not all I have. I carry this shrapnel too, wherever I walk. The lines in his face took over from there, to explain how he'd fallen in love with his girl. "I got home from the front," those lines said to me, "and I found the blondest woman in this warless world." A woodsman hired me, and I earned my pay by chopping logs as my exhausting career. Then I bought her a ring as gold as her hair, and we were wed by the end of the year. And then I got my woman pregnant with a baby girl, and we were both so happy we cried. That night I slept with my head on her stomach to listen to my daughter forming inside. I had wanted a daughter much more than a son because a girl is more delicate and gentle, and of course I wouldn't tell her my stories from the war, but I would sure as hell show her my medal. And now all the wrinkles in the old man's face grew deeper and wider as they spoke, and I could tell they were growing sadder too, but the voice never shook and they didn't choke. One night I slept with my fingers in her hair to console her pregnant mind with my healing hands. But when lifting her head waking up the next morning, she left my fingers tangled with her golden strands. I didn't tell her that I knew she was sick, because I was certain she knew and didn't want to tell me. But I brought her golden tresses to the doctor in town, and his cast was as cold as I feared it would be. At that point the wrinkles could take no more, and they disappeared back into the old man's head. So then the man's bloodshot eyes took over to tell me exactly what the doctor had said. "You have no idea how sorry I am." The old man's eyes recited the voice faintly. "But the lab results came back today, and I don't think she'll live to have the baby." The old man's eyes had had enough right there, and they quickly looked down to the floor. But a dark scar in the skin of the man's arm revealed itself and told me more. "The funeral was for two," the scar said to me, "and we buried them both behind the barn. I punched through a mirror once the priest had left, and it carved a deep gash in my right arm. I saw the same doctor who had diagnosed my wife. My muscles were severed and my tendons were torn. I could no longer chop wood, and work was rare to find for a boy who ditched school to go fight in the war. The old man's limp stood up and stepped forward, pushing the scars and wrinkles aside to finish the story it had originally begun, clearing its throat once for effect, and then again to be polite. I spent the next year sad and searching for work, and wasting my money to heal my wound. I was no longer able to hold an axe in my hand, and I never would, or so the doctor presumed. I'll spare you any more of my details from there, because I was once a young man like you, and I don't want to ruin your simple days with all the misfortune this old limp has trekked through. So his limp stopped its speech and said no more, and I watched as it hobbled away. But when the old man took a breath in my direction, there was one final thing it had to say. "I've become a drinker," the breath said to me, "to reverse my memories, whether good or bad. Better safe than sorry, so erase them all, in the decades since I've lost everything I had. I sold the barn," the breath went on, hiding the headstones beneath a bale of rotted hay, because I couldn't afford a home so large, and its size only made it thrice as empty anyway. The old man's body was silent again. He stared at me and held out his closed fist, and I knew his entire story from his limp and his breath and his bloodshot eyes and his disfigured wrist. "Can you give me anything for this?" He spoke again and began to let his fingers come apart. He put his fist to the counter and removed his hand, and revealed to me a purple heart.